Hello, welcome to Compy and Conversations. I am Sam Harvey from the Center for Career and Professional Development, and today we're going to talk about building a job portfolio. So this is going to be specifically looking at portfolios in terms of applying for positions, so not necessarily for selling work or anything like that. There'll be a lot of the same concepts, so if you're looking for that, probably still get some good stuff out of this. So portfolios are one of the most important parts of your application. A large portion of whether a company is going to call you in is going to be based on if they like the work that you've shown in the portfolio. So going into the application process, you don't necessarily have a lot of control over what the company is looking for. They may be looking for someone whose work matches their current look and feel, or they may be looking for something completely different from that. You can't necessarily predict what they're after. Possibly if you have a connection within the company, that can be a really helpful thing to be able to predict a little bit more what they're after, but the most that you can really have control over is what they're going to be looking at, how they're going to view it, and what supplemental information you add around that. That adds the context to what you're doing. Context is always really important because you've probably been having those conversations where you're walking down the street and you're like, oh, if someone overheard what I just said, they'd be really confused. It's the same thing for when you're looking at your work. It doesn't exist within a void just because I can see the final product of it. That doesn't tell me the whole story about what is going on inside your head and what you're looking at in order to create that project. So I'm going to take some time to go over really the purpose of a portfolio. So it's really meant to show the abilities that you have, highlight your strengths, and reveal some insight into the process of the current work that you're doing. You really want to highlight the current stuff that you're doing because what you're doing right now might be really different than the work you did your first year, your second year, and what you will present to a company when you're working for them is going to align much more currently with what you're doing right now than it's going to be what you did 5 years ago. A job portfolio is not an archive of every single project you've ever done. It's not a collection of every single piece you've even done recently. It's meant to really just give the viewer an idea of the work you're capable of doing. So having everything that you've ever done as a way of trying to use it as a catch-all is not going to be super helpful for the employer that's looking at it because they're not going to necessarily know what's your current stuff right now, and if anything, it might get really confusing for them to see really old work in there, especially if they like the old work more and then you come in and you talk more about new work. That might be a reason for not getting a position when it comes down to it. So what do you want to include in your portfolio? Well, keeping that purpose in mind, you want to definitely show your best work, show off the things that you're most proud of and that you think answer the problem that you were setting out to answer in the best ways. Even if it's that, well, the problem was this and I ended up all the way over here in a completely different world. If you're happy with the outcome of that project, then it's super worth it to throw that into the portfolio because that shows the way that your thoughts evolve a little bit over time. That being said, the work should also be relevant to the position that you're applying to. So if you're a graphic design major, there should be graphics in your resume, in your portfolio, and on the work you're presenting. It's awesome if you're applying for graphic design positions and you have some cool interior spaces that you designed before, but you need to make sure that there are graphics as part of that place, such as typography, such as even just figuring out some layouts of some things. If it's just a space and you're applying to a graphic position, that's not necessarily really helpful for me to understand how you would work in a graphics space. And as mentioned, you really need to whittle down your portfolio. So really it's only going to be about 3 to 5 projects, maybe 6, and I'll talk about why maybe 6 in a little bit. But what I mean by a project is going to vary by major. So that doesn't mean 3 to 5 images, and what is a project is going to differ based off what assignments you've done, what work you've done, what that looks like. So for a graphic designer, it might be that it's a poster. A poster could be a project that you did. But you could also have a marketing campaign, which includes posters, t-shirts, websites. Maybe it's a branding project that also has a marketing aspect to it. Those sorts of projects that you do very much in your senior year end up being those sort of wider projects. That still counts as one project within that 3 to 5. So the earlier you are in your college courses, the smaller the projects you have will be, and that's totally fine. Not every project needs to be campaign sized, but you also don't want to show someone 20 posters and say, well, that equals 3 to 5 projects, just because 20 posters later on in a project that all goes together makes sense. 20 separate types of posters don't necessarily count as one project that you do. So you always want to figure that out, is also making sure that the person isn't feeling lost in what you're giving to them. So that really hits that idea also that you need to make sure you're showing off a variety of skills. So you obviously, as I've said, want to tailor the portfolio to the type of job you're looking for, but you also want to make sure you're not showing them that you're one note. So if you're a fashion major, you might show off your draping skills, but that doesn't mean you want a portfolio of all draping. You also want to show off your abilities to make patterns, your abilities with different stitching and bonding techniques as well. So while the job might be about a specific thing, just to try to jump around and vary my majors, it could be something like window displays that you're looking to be doing. Within a portfolio for that, you can show off things that aren't necessarily window displays, as long as they're showing similar 3D and space planning skills. So it doesn't need to be drastically, well, I'm applying for this, so I can only put this in here, but there needs to be a correlation between what you're showing. If you're really looking to do a graphic design position again, then there's no reason for you to maybe put in the short film that you did, unless you're specifically highlighting the graphics you did for that short film. So then the final sort of big thing about what to include is process. So whenever we talk to employers, whenever we talk to anyone, the biggest thing we get is that they really want to see the process of your work. So a final project is great, but they really want to know how you got there. Did you prototype stuff out? What informed your color choices? What research went into creating this final piece? So when I say we want to see process, that tends to mean showing some of the sketches you did. Maybe it's a little bit of a research or a mood board. It's showing maybe some of the variations you tried early in the process. Really start to make sure that you can see the choices that were made along the way that helped to develop the project into what it is. It doesn't need to be every single step covered, but think in broad strokes. What made you pick the initial logo design? What made you go for the initial idea? What were the original gesture drawings like? How did it change from that idea to what it ended up being? What influenced that? Was it a really loose gesture drawing that then became a little bit more rigid when you started to pick the materials that you wanted to use? That's going to be really important for the employer to know, because that's going to let them know how you're going to think about the projects you do for them. You need to really show that your work doesn't exist within a void. How are you testing if things work, and how are you changing to adapt to the needs that you see around that? Is it that you had someone interact with your piece and you realized, hey, they're not doing what I wanted them to do, it's not comfortable? That changes everything, and that's really important for them to see, because they want someone who's going to be aware of how human interaction with things is going to change how they end up in the end. So then where does your portfolio actually live? So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of online portfolios in a little bit, but just to really talk about the different options for where this lives. So no matter what field you're in, I would recommend having an online portfolio. So this would be a linkable site that you'll be able to share with people and they can view your work. This is great to have for networking events. You can put this on your card. It's just a really easy way for people to start to find you without having to pass big files back and forth. Some places where you can build an online portfolio, one would be portfolios.pratt.edu. That's the partnership site we have with Behance, which is a really great site for being able to put your stuff up. It's pretty easy to use. We also send employers there regularly to look at student work. There's also Weebly and Wix. Both are template-based websites that have a free version of them that you would be able to use. Then there's Squarespace. Squarespace is a paid-only type of service. There's also a bunch of other ways of hosting your websites out there. There's something through Adobe. That's the big one, I think. You could do a WordPress. There's a lot of options out there for where to host. So the online portfolio is the quick, easy link to do for the majority of majors. That's kind of the industry standard. Some other things to consider is if you're in film or animation, you're going to want to have a Vimeo account or a YouTube account where you have things posted up as well. So for PDFs, if you're especially within interior design or architecture, there's still an expectation of sending a PDF of your portfolio. If you're not that major, you should still have a PDF version of it that you can pull up for interviews in case you can't access the internet. So still bringing your laptop with you on interviews or your tablet device, have it loaded up in there. You might be able to get to the website, they might pull up the website, but sometimes you won't have access to the internet, so it's always good to have that PDF ready to go. And some places might want you to send it as a PDF. Then the final sort of way this might live is in print form. Once more, for architectures and interior design majors, it's pretty standard to have a printed book still. For other majors, it tends to be more up to you. If you're going to print, however, make sure you have high quality images, that your text is legible, and that the book itself is well put together. Having a low quality printed book is going to really undermine the work that's in it because they're going to be judging your construction of the book a lot and really how that ends up highlighting the work that you're doing. And which just ties into the presentation of your work. So whether you're thinking online or PDF, how you present your artwork, that's the package that it's going into. That's going to end up also being a big judgment zone for the potential employer. So when you're putting this all together, first and foremost, keep it simple. You don't want the design to overshadow the work, and you want to avoid overcrowding a page. As a general rule, if you're trying to lay out your images and something is so small that you can't really see what's happening in it, it's probably an image that you don't find that important to the project. Consider not including it. If you really do no, this is a key part, then you need to make sure that it's viewable for the person to look at. If I can't get into the details of what's going on there, then I'm going to question why you even put it on the page in the first place. Don't put things there just to fill up space. Always have a purpose for why you're showing me something, and if you're showing it to me, make sure I can actually see it. Within that same vein, you don't need to put every image of the project in there. Really think of it like if you were looking at somebody's vacation photos, you really don't want to see every different view of the Eiffel Tower that they took. You don't want to see oh, here's the base. Oh, here we are a few feet up from there and a few feet up from there. You want the general swatches of it. You might get, oh, cool, this was from the base. Oh, cool, this was from halfway up. Oh, cool, this was from the highest peak. That's all you really need to do. You don't need to see every little detail of every little angle. This is especially important to remember within fashion design. Definitely you want some detail shots, but I don't need, here's a front version, here's a slightly turned version, here's another slightly turned version from that. With package design, that's the other sort of area I see this a lot, and I will show some examples of this later on. So really think of how someone is going to be interacting with the work that you're doing, and if it's going to get monotonous. Really take it from an idea of, if it wasn't your work, would you be interested in looking at this? Do you want to scroll this much to get through the project? Are you getting a new thing every single time you scroll or go to a new page? Is it telling you a new part of the story, and isn't it an exciting part of the story? Really take that time to be reflective, hand it to your roommate to look through, hand it to your professor if they're willing to look through your stuff. Really take on that self-reflection though too, and go outside yourself to go, well, if someone handed this to me, would I hire them? So within the presentation, the other thing you want to really do is add descriptions of what it is that's being looked at. So it can be just a short title of what I'm being shown on the page. It can say name of the project and then the word prototype. Great, that's helpful for me to know. You might add a little bit more of that, especially in some of the process sections, just to include a little narrative about the choices you were making. It doesn't need to be long, just enough to give someone an idea of what they're looking at if you're not there to explain things. So it can just even be a label of, oh, these are the different types of fabrics that I was working with. These are the different tests that I was doing on this, just to give it a little bit of an idea of what type of things were happening, what I'm looking at on the page. As far as the order of things, you want to highlight the strong pieces early, but you also want to make sure you save a strong piece for the end as well. So specifically when you make a PDF or you're showing your work during an interview, you have a lot of control over the order. When someone is on the web, it's a little impossible to fully know where someone's going to click, but there's a couple of different tools you can use to help direct them to exactly the work that you want them to look at. So things such as using really interesting images, limiting the work to what you actually want them to look at. If your top 6 are the ones that you're like, well, no, this is my portfolio. These other ones are old projects that I really like, but that's not my portfolio. Then take out all the extra work, because the person is very likely to end up scrolling to that. There's probably hiring managers that go to the bottom of the page to see what you're trying to hide from them. If you're trying to hide something, then it's not worth having it on the page to begin with. And then you can also do other things on your pages that will direct to other similar works, and I have a great example of this later. So then, similar to your resume, when you make a design, keep that design parallel across your projects. If you decide to do process first, and then go into the final piece, then you always need to lead with the process. If you set up a certain grid, stick to that grid system. Basically make it so people don't need to search for information in a different place for every project. So this really does mean, like, someone might be really just looking, if you're a fashion person, for your tech packs. Always put your tech packs in the same part of the presentation so that person can get to them and look at them as quickly as possible. They're getting hundreds of, not more, applications. They want to get to what they care about quickly, and then they're going to move on. Hopefully they take a little bit more time, they're intrigued by the work, look at some of the other things, but overall they're going, cool, I care about this specific thing. Maybe it's, well, what type are they using, or what are their sketches look like? You never know what the person looking at your portfolio is really looking for from somebody, what maybe is missing from the team, what maybe they're looking to replace that they lost when the team member that you might be taking the job of left. So always making sure that they can quickly and easily find the things that they want. So then when you're presenting your work to somebody, there's a couple of things I just want you to keep in mind. One, for the projects, talk about the final piece and what you created for that, like what the total outcome was, but also talk about the direction you took and the exploration phase. Projects evolve over time. Talk about that evolution so they can see how you're making these decisions. It could be something like, yeah, well, I had to bring it outside for this, and it got rained on and destroyed, so then I had to redo it. But that's when I realized that it needed to be waterproof. Talk about what it is that really influenced the decisions that led you to where you are. If you started somewhere and ended in the same place, then that may not be a successful project. It might still be a successful project, but it's always worth then saying, well, why didn't it change over time, and have a conversation about why this was a great idea in the first round that you did. Make sure you highlight every specific thing that your hand helped create. So if you took the photos, if you did the illustrations, make sure that they know what work you really did. If you didn't take the photos, if you got the illustrations from stuff, that's totally fine. You don't need to specify that necessarily. You probably are, depending on it, supposed to credit the person on the page. But if you did do them, highlight that. It's another skill you would be able to bring to the company, and you never know. Maybe they were looking for someone who's going to be doing interiors, but they also really want to add some more illustration to the work that they do. Then saying you did the illustrations might be really exciting for them. That's going to be important And it could be maybe like, okay, well, I actually made this textile that I used in this photo for this thing. That's great for them to know. It shows, once more, new skills that they might not have known that you had, and also a level of dedication that you're going to have to the work that's coming in, that you'll be doing with them. If you show a piece that you don't like, it tends to get pretty obvious that you don't like it right away. You'll try to speed through the piece. Your voice is probably going to get a little flatter. That's why if you don't like a piece, don't put it in your portfolio. Focus on work that excites you, not work that, even if it got you a good grade, if you're not excited about it, it's going to really deflate you, and the person that's listening is going to know, and they're going to also feel deflated. There's that mirror thing. If you're excited about a piece, they'll be more excited about the piece. If you speed through a piece, the question will become, well, why did you put this in here? Did you not have anything better to show me? It adds a little bit of doubt in their mind. Then the final thing is to just really be aware of time. If you're at a networking event, you might be talking about one piece with the person that you're talking to. Maybe you let that person drive through what they want to see and you give quick overviews of your pieces, because that's a networking event. People don't necessarily have a ton of time to sit around and really go through your full portfolio. During an interview, you might only have 20 minutes. You might also have an hour. You might have 2 hours. You don't necessarily know going into it. Hopefully they gave you some idea of it, but it's always okay to ask how much time you have left or how much time you have at the beginning, so that you know if you're about 2 or 3 projects in, maybe you have 2 more, but the 4th one is not as exciting as the 5th one, that, okay, I'm going to skip the 4th one and just go to the 5th one right now. It's better to skip some middle project that you don't really find that exciting to get to the better, more exciting projects you find at the end. Once more, because the last thing you show them is going to be one of the big ones they remember. And once more, why you start with an exciting one is because then they'll be excited about what else you're going to show them that day. So definitely always being aware of your time will be really helpful. Okay, so I'm going to go jump over to the web now and just show you some examples of what I've talked about. So this is the Pratt portfolio sites. This is portfolios.pratt.edu. So this is what this ends up looking like. It's sort of this little picture and then little modules that have the different projects. So earlier I said sometimes I say 6. It's for things like this is where I might say 6 projects are okay, because having this white space can sometimes not be the greatest looking thing in the world. So if you go into these individual projects, you'll really get an outline. So when I'm really talking about process, there's a couple of different ways to think about this. In this case, this person showed the really, really hand-rendered group thing that they did for their model, showing some of the interior shots and other plans. They then showed their prototyping model that they did out of foam. And over here in the About the Project, you can see where they overview what the materials are. But then when you get to the bottom of this, you start to see some more of the looser sketch phases of this. You can see the shape of this project is a little bit different. It's not necessarily fully fledged out, and based off what it ended up becoming, you can see there were some changes that were made along the way with this. If you go even further down, you'll see kind of the very early sketchings of figuring out how the mechanics of this was possibly going to end up working, how this was possibly going to end up looking, this sort of shell-like idea. And then here at the bottom, you can see what are like probably the studied drawings, the gestures of figuring out just the overall shape that this person wanted to work with. So you can see that it doesn't need to be an extensive amount of process work that you show, but really being able to see, okay, this was some of the start work, this was some of that, and that led to this is really nice. What I wish this person had was a little bit more description throughout to be able to walk me through some of these ideas that they had and why it changed from sort of this shape and this sort of movement-based thing to this, or is it maybe something I'm just missing because there is no description on there. So then a little bit more of an example of the description side of things is in this project. So it's for this sort of carbon tracker. You can tell this was probably made for a class presentation, but a great way to think about your projects is that you would be presenting them in class. So it has a little bit of an explanation of what the project is, a little bit of the research being said around CO2 emissions, some of how this project works, and once more, a little bit more of the description about what the research was saying for things. So this is how much a car is versus how much a bike is. Once more, some colors and form inspiration that the person did 2 different types of it. Down here you can see some sort of band development prototyping where they fill out sort of this is where they began, this is where they ended up, and it kind of brings through the testing process of what this looked like. And then you get here to the final sort of putting together of everything, the sort of final tech packing of it, the pairing, and some photos of it at the end. But what's really important here is really looking one at this prototyping phase and how that's been laid out, as you can sort of see the decisions made. And even though there's a lot more bands here than there are text bits, I can understand the story and take a minute to understand why this was going, why this happened this way. And then even this little bit of research section here helps me understand why is this important? Where did the idea even stem from? What were some of the main factors outside of the world, outside of like the prompt that you were given that were used to develop the project? Okay, so it's a lot of industrial design. They have a little bit of a move towards this. So then this is another way of really being, I really like this one because this shows another way of showing some of this process and research that isn't necessarily so presentation based. This is a really good thing, just idea of just take photos along the way. So even these photos of this big board happening, some of the sketches happening, thoughts as they were going through it. So someone, it looks like they maybe voted on functions a little bit. They looked at some different ways that this device might end up attaching. They have the research kind of spelled out there just by taking photos throughout the process of what they were doing. Here's some general inspiration that they used. Here's some like shape design of just trying to figure stuff out. And here's even showing that connection between how they thought about things connecting together. So even using that, like we had the artichoke image earlier, here's what the artichoke helped inspire in us. And then as you go through, you can see just how that continues to develop over time to create sort of the final process piece in the end. This is another one that I wish had a little bit more text to go along with it, but you can even see over though on the side a little bit more about the product itself, and then you still can get a really strong idea of the journey that was being had throughout the creation of this. So then I'm going to show you now an example of what I was talking about earlier with package design and fashion design, where you don't need to show me every single version of a thing that you have. So this is a designer that does some really great work. There's a project that does a really good job of doing these things in their grouping as well. But here's this one. So this one is for some bags that they're creating. You can see pretty early on. Okay, different colors, different feels. This is great. This shows me slightly different layouts of things that give me an idea and taste of what the person that might use this is a little bit like. And then you start to see the different layouts of the different types of bags or holders that they might do. This nice close-up, this, and then we get here. So here, okay, you see the big version of it, these 2 smaller notebooks. Great. And here it is in green, and here it is in purple, and here it is in black. I've already seen the different colors treatments that they have. I don't need to see this same thing laid out this many times in a row. I would be really interested in seeing this close-up of the stitching on each individual one, but I don't need this far away thing that tells me nothing except the difference in color and that there is a difference in character between the different projects being shown. But this is nice. You can see some of the sketches that were done, how it was developed. It's overall a nice presentation of the project, but once more, you don't need to see every version in every different color because it doesn't necessarily tell me more about what's happening here. So now I'm going to move away from Prep Pro and show you an example of a website design that isn't a Prep Pro thing. So you always want it to be, once I land on the page, that I can see the work right away. Getting to the work is the number one thing because that's what people are here to see. In this case, this person has 6 projects on here. It keeps it nice and symmetrical. And when you click into one, you can see their project overview, some of the principles they used, visual motif. So as you kind of go through, once more, you're getting an idea of what are all the contributing pieces to this project, something even just what's the grid system that they used, and then you start to see how this might look in motion. And it's not worried about showing me everything consistently all at the same time, but even when it is, each image is dynamic, it's fun to look at, it's grouped together, I don't need to keep scrolling forever to see it. This is really good for UI UX design of seeing the thing in motion if this is something you developed, and some of the different areas and screens available. And then what's really nice here is at the bottom of this, I can very quickly go to a different project. I don't need to jump back to the work page in order to find my way to the next thing. And this is a great way to direct people because they'll probably click on the first project you have. And then down here, you can figure out what order you want them to click next. So maybe I'll go to the J's next. And this will then go through a similar breakdown of, so here's some of the research, here's some of the direction. This is obviously not in fully English, but you can also, even if you don't speak this language, get an idea of some of the thought going into this project before you go in. And a nice sort of touch that this person has on here is they have their work page. This is their portfolio. This is the work that they are looking for jobs in. They also have what they are calling the non-work page, where they can show a little bit more of that other work that they have that doesn't belong in the portfolio itself. It can feel really hard to not have all the work you've done. You spent time on it, you like the work you did, but it doesn't necessarily belong in the portfolio. It's still nice work. I would also recommend always using your Instagram account to highlight some of the things like this. You can maybe do a throwback and be like, oh, remember this bird thing I made, and post that up on your Instagram. It's a really great way of showing off old work and skills that you still have without taking up the space that can be used for a more relevant and newer project in your portfolio. Okay, so that's all I have to say on portfolios. If you have questions, always feel free to reach out to me. My email is on the screen, and have a great day. Bye.